If that makes sense.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh. I'm going to say first off that I thought this play was phenomenal. It was visually pleasing, the writing was fantastic, the acting was fantastic. And see, what spoke to me in this play was the journey that Sophia takes as a writer. It goes through her thinking process, how the characters speak to her. And I was wondering, does Sophia's journey in any way reflect, say, the trials or the steps that you take as a writer? Like, do the characters speak to you? Does the story just come in a certain way? Does it reflect how you work as a writer?
Okay. I find it's impossible not to put yourself into what you're writing, if only because I can only write from my own experience. At the very simplest level, I can imagine. I mean, they talk about that Shakespeare didn't have to want to kill his dad to write Hamlet, and that's definitely true. But at the same time, most of what's going to inform what I write will be the kind of experiences, the kind of worldview, the kind of things I've been through. Now, there'll also be buckets of details that you have in your experience that are in themselves so true and so real that when you add them into a scene or a moment, they ground something invented in reality in a way that just seems real and human and believable to an audience. And so I often find that I'm putting small things from my life into play, and also larger things from life. And I've also had the gorgeous experience of putting things into my life that haven't happened, and then they've happened. So I plan to write about winning the lotto in my in the hope that will come true. But you can't be divorced. I mean, even if I try to deny it, I will be in these people's, in the heads and hearts of these characters. They'll speak with my voice. In fact, that's something we had to work on, because there was all sorts of places where my growing up in Dublin, living in Ireland, voice, language, custom occasionally came up against, no, we don't talk like that over here. We speak our English and you speak yours. And that's absolutely normal and natural, and we talk about it quite a bit, so that maybe in Ireland we might use the Irishisms, but people have to be understood, the play has to be understood, so you change the convention. We're talking today, in Dublin it was, they had takeaway on the way home. Here they had takeout on the way home. Even little things like that you can change and adapt appropriately. Not to be too precious.
I have a question for Nicole. I was really drawn, I've seen this show twice now, but at the very final scene, I was really drawn between the connection between Sophia and you, and the final, the final ending, the last time that you guys got to see each other. What was going on in through your head, in that scene, because I'm picturing it, and I'm still trying to question why you didn't take the medicine and all that. How does that affect you? Do you even know, when you're, in university?
Yes. Actually, what the medicine at the end was the biggest struggle for me, for this character. And it took me a while to wrap my head around the concept of, I was I can't understand, I viewed it as a selfish thing at first, why. When we got to Ireland, we had 2 weeks before we actually did the show, and I had some good conversations with Martin over here, and my understanding grew a lot more. But it comes a point throughout the play where Lydia notices that her daughter is gonna be okay, and she's becoming a successful playwright. She has this boyfriend who seems great, her life, she's gonna be okay. And Lydia has, in my mind, a character choice. She's gone through cancer before. This is her second bout of cancer, and the struggle is really, it's extremely difficult. And so when she hits the point in the play where she's you know, my daughter can do this by herself. I'm done struggling because I think that everything's going to be fine. So it's not like Lydia has never been taking the medication. She has, but she decides to stop when she knows her daughter's going to be okay. So, does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
I was particularly interested watching the different relationships that you have with each other, like the sister relationship and the love relationship, the little kids can do. But the one part, the dad, you know, it's like you like, how do you spin between like, it seemed like the time you were silly, but then you were really always sinister. Everybody else I seem to have a relationship with somebody else that kind of grew or evolved. And what do you have in a relationship with besides, you know, your daughter?
Well, besides them, maybe myself. Are you talking about the dad or the actor?
Go for it, I don't care, you do it.
Great. Well, the actor, Tom, like Sarah, easy.
Oh my gosh!
Oh man, the father is like, that's the part that I had when we first got like the original copy of the script. I was always the father, and it was always this looming character because he's also his bird form is the crow, and there's a lot of like she pulls out the feathers at some part. They talk about crows being like sinister, like Rook on its own is a crow, and we don't go near those. No, because they're mean. So I just took kind of like the crow imagery, and I put it into the father, who once he got more lines, like I was able to understand him more, and I guess that's what came of it. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, great. Yeah, and you know, it's fun, imaginatively. So the actors, as they played more and more, everyone has a moment of becoming a bird, just about. You know, even if it's just, you know, in the meltdown in the hospital when the director comes in and is standing there flamingo style, right? Everyone sort of becomes some kind of bird. But then Katya very cleverly sort of runs with that. It's like, why does Sophia see her as a flamingo of all things? You know, so you see, if you know, you go back when you come back tomorrow, it's like, you notice she'll stand back there leaning on the table, standing on one foot, you know, and just sort of leaning on it, so that you'll see her sort of in that flamingo pose in other moments. So you'll see that that sort of impacted Sophia. That's in her mind, right? So many of them found moments where they know they're going to be this bird at some point. So where in the story can we see why that bird suddenly manifests itself in Sophia's mind, in her imagination? We got coming pretty close to wrapping up. There's one more here.
Being that this is a pretty difficult storyline, you know, there's a lot of emotion in there. Did you find yourself digging deep inside yourself, saying, "Wow, I dealt with something like this once," or "I have a good friend who dealt with something like this"? I mean, anything similar that's just so emotional. And also, did you, like, at that time when Sophia is screaming where that terrible thing was being pulled out of her, did you, like, "Oh, I need to hug you now because you just dealt with that really horrible scene in rehearsal," and, you know, just, you know, the support of your cast members, you know, did any of you, you know, really have to deal with something terrible like that?
Yeah, well, actually, one of the other talkbacks, I talked about how, like, that had been kind of like a method of acting that I had definitely started with when I first got into acting, where I would use, like, past emotions that brought up, like, that similar type of emotion, like, inside my work. And, but one of the things that we learn in our classes big time here is, like, the biggest things, you have to stay in the moment. So it's always tricky to do that because it's tricky to pull up an emotion, part of your own life, and bring it inside somebody else's life that you're living on stage. And At first, that was something that I was like thinking about, and then all of a sudden, I started falling like deeper and deeper into like Sophia's character, and I realized that if something that normally in my own life would touch me like immediately, like I started talking about it, I'd get really emotional. If I thought about it on stage, I didn't feel that emotion, and it wouldn't get there, and I had to just be completely in in Sophia's life and what was going on around her and what it was that was triggering those emotions for her. And I mean, there were basically every single night when I would come back from rehearsal, that I would just be like, well, I'm not getting through homework right now. My roommate's in the audience right now, and she just nodded her head. But that was something I have to kind of just like sit and let it settle. And it still is like, it's a really hard thing to come out of. Even going out to dinner with my parents after one of the shows, I was just kind of like, gotta stay quiet or else I'll just snapping at you, Mom. Like, so yeah, I think the biggest thing was really getting to know Sophia really well. And yeah, something I do is I journal a lot, through my process, and then also through what Sophia's going through. And I kind of have to, before every show, like read through those journal entries and just go over like what my mind has gone through the whole process before I get on stage.
I think also another thing for all of us is that behind stage, we're total goofs. So like at the end of the day, the fact that we can go back and just laugh, I think helps a lot. And the fact that we do really care about each other, and then we can just let it all out and let it go, and then pick each other up again. I think that's a big thing that helped us all get through this show.
This has been a very long talk back already. Thank you for